Hello there. Thanks for checking out another episode of the Restoration Today podcast. Today, I am very excited to be joined by Mike Fulton, who is the CEO of Xactware. I want Mike to join the conversation today. There are a lot of things happening in the industry, and pricing is always a big topic. And now there's inflation and labor shortages and rates. And, there's just so much to talk about in this space. But I don't know if everybody in the industry also understands that Mike hasn't just worked at Xactware. He also has a background in the industry and understands things from both sides. So I want to try to facilitate a conversation here that answers a lot of questions that are on the restorers' minds and kind of open up the dialogue with Mike and Xactware. So Mike, thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate it. I'm just going to toss it over to you and have you introduce yourself.
Oh, great. Well, thanks, Michelle. I really appreciate the opportunity. Always like the opportunity to get in front of folks and talk about that, which we do. Michelle and I have just met within the last few weeks, but obviously I'm well aware of her and what her background is in the industry. Many of the folks I would imagine that are listening to this know me, know my background. I've been with the Xactware organization now for 29 years, so quite a while. I still do remain licensed as a general contractor. That was how I began in the industry back in 1978, and at that time did all types from new construction to remodeling and restoration. Back in the day, I started at Xactware in 1992, and as anybody that's been in the business for a time knows that the restoration industry is quite different today than it was pre-1992. But I have been deeply involved in the industry, obviously, and remained that way since joining the Xactware team. And really the group at Xactware, many of us have a background in construction. We were founded by a gentleman that was one of the largest restoration contractors in Utah at the time. The team that when I started the organization, I led the pricing data research team, the team that does all the research and evaluation of building cost data out there in the market. So I got to know the founder really well. We hit it off really well within the industry, but everybody within that group has got a construction background. That's specifically the industry from which we hire folks, so that when folks call in and have a question about a price that we're publishing, whether that's the installation of drywall or roof shingles or drying out a structure, they're talking to people that have actually done the work and that can relate to them and answer their questions and kind of point them in the right direction on how the price list is actually structured. But that's my background in the industry. Love doing it. Have really enjoyed enjoy taking things apart and putting them back together. That's how I got started in the industry. The fact that I can still be involved in that industry and sit in an office that's air conditioned in the summer and heated in the winter is really great for me. So have really appreciated that.
So what was going on in the industry in 1992 that made you and others feel like, the industry needs something like Xactimate or whatever? I'm sure that it's evolved considerably. I know there used to be notebooks and spiral bound things and all the things, but what was going on then?
It really is interesting for me and so many people in the industry back then, because this was really just at kind of the start of even the PC. When I got out of school, I spent, I think it was $125 on a PC that had 100 megabytes of hard drive space. And I said, I will never fill this thing up. But I really just wasn't aware of the types of applications that are out there. I was busy going out and putting on my own tool belt and driving my truck around and doing things and managing my own crew. I fell into this when I relocated my family, which was just one child at the time, from Atlanta to Utah, and fully planned to start up a construction business when I moved here. Timing being what it was, by the time we actually got here and got closed and settled into our home, it was October, with winter coming, as they say. And so Mike decided he needed to find a job that would get him through the winter, and just stumbled across Xactware, which Xactware started in 1986. I joined in 1992. Really small company at the time. I think there were a total of 35 employees at the time. But it was really the way the company was founded was a gentleman that was doing restoration work in the area, really had a desire to computerize that which he was doing. He liked to say that it was because he couldn't read his own handwriting and needed to do something that was a little bit more structured. But hired a developer. We don't call them, or hired a programmer. We don't call them programmers anymore. They're engineers or developers at this point, to build that piece of software called Xactimate in his basement. started using it with the full intention of just using it within his own business. But as he started using it amongst other adjusters and amongst other contractors that saw it, realized that there was a market for it, and literally just eventually closed up his construction business and started selling it. So it was really at a time when you're trying to, I guess, for lack of a better term, make things more consistent in the industry. Insurers were wanting to see a consistent output that was being given to their policyholders. Contractors were looking at ways that they could be more consistent in their estimating amongst the different insurance carriers that they're working for, and even within the different estimators that were working within their system. And so it really just grew from that. And at the time, it was just an estimating application. And it wasn't until the internet was invented in the mid 1990s that we branched into a collaboration tool that eventually became XactAnalysis, that allowed insurers to collaborate and send assignments to contractors, and made things much more and so where you could track time and process and things of that nature, and spend and so on, and really provide more of a full service type reporting. Then eventually got onto the personal property side with Exact Contents, now Claim Experience, which is the policyholder collaboration tool. Some of those folks listening might be familiar with our Exact Remodel product that we're just in the process of reinventing and reimagining and re-releasing for folks that like to stay entrenched in that field as well. But all about construction from our perspective, just understanding it, putting things together, and providing as best as possible an appropriate price if needed for the market.
Okay. So on that note, let's talk about pricing. What is Xactwares' process for creating pricing in Xactimate?
So it has grown substantially, Michelle. When I started, I think there were a total of 2,000 items in that price list, which I thought was a tremendously large number of prices from somebody that came from the business, more than what I would need. That's now expanded to around 17,000 items. And the main driver for that is, as we started producing what's now called 360 value, which is a total reconstruction cost calculator. And what that's used for is on the underwriting side. So when you as a prospective policyholder call up an insurance carrier and want to purchase insurance on your home, and you answer questions like the square footage, the location, the year built, number of bedrooms, number of baths, things of that nature, and some features, it'll actually produce a value that says, based upon what we think we know, the total cost to rebuild your home should be X. Therefore, you need to purchase this amount of insurance coverage. And when we branched into that world, that just caused the need for that price list to expand exponentially. It went from 2,000 items to about 17,000. Frankly, as we go into other countries now, as we're starting to go into other countries in Europe and Australia and so on, my goal is to keep the number of items down in the 500 or less, because I just don't think I want more flexibility to happen in the marketplace rather than so much rigidity. But what we do is we research, we take a bottom-up approach, what we call a bottom-up approach. So if it's to build a price for something like the square foot of half-inch drywall with a certain type of finish, we'll say, okay, we know it needs obviously a square foot of half-inch gypsum board. We know on average that it should need this many screws per square foot, this much tape, this much mud, et cetera, glue, if you're not going to be able to use screws or where that's required by code, et cetera, this much labor to put it on. And that varies, obviously, depending upon whether I'm doing the ceiling and a small basement bedroom closet, or I'm doing an entire home. You have to equate to a certain job size because labor productivity is so critical in that. But you build up a bottom-up price, and then what it's going to take. Then you start researching those things at different suppliers. What's the cost of the gypsum board and the tape and the nails and the screws and so on? You try and get hourly rates from the market, whether that's from different economic resources that publish it, different union scale that publish those things, as well as job services, contractors in the field providing that information to you. And then you try and, once you have that built up from the bottom up, you try and validate it from the top down. And what that means is we start calling drywall installers, for example, in different markets, and basically saying, what do you charge? If you're doing an average size restoration job of, let's say, 2 rooms, 12 by 12 with an 8-foot ceiling and this type of a finish, what do you charge per square foot? Then we take and aggregate that, and the difference between the top down and the bottom up goes into certain types of market conditions. The goal is really to target what the top down price is. So what are the contractors actually saying that price should be in that market? The bottom up information helps contractors and insurers to have intelligent conversations about what goes into the price and to appropriately estimate sales tax where you need to do that. But the whole idea is trying to build up a competitive rate or a prevailing rate for the thing in that particular market. And then assuming, and this is the other thing that's always the question with regard to overhead and profit that gets added at the end, what is that going to be at the end? So when we call up Joe's Construction or Bob's Drywall, you have to say, what you're able to get on an overhead and profit on a particular type of job. Subtract that. Give us the price that you charge for this thing minus what you're able to get for overhead and profit. And we all know we're living in the 10 and 10 world, and we can have long conversations about that and where it needs to be. But be that at it as it may, it is where it is. So apart from that, what should the price be beyond that? And that's literally what we do for. Obviously, if you do the math, 17,000 items in 467 markets, but many of them are shared components. Mm-hmm. So the cost of an 8-penny finish nail or the cost of an hourly rate of a finish carpenter can be used in many different things, costs in the same way that the cost of a gallon of paint and so on. So you're leveraging the cost of some of those bottom up things across a number of items. But we've got a massive team of people that do this all day, every day. And we get input direct from material suppliers, from equipment providers. We look at estimates that are returned to our system, and we make probably in the neighborhood of close to 350,000 phone calls to contractors and suppliers every year to try and get that information. And frankly, one of the challenges is getting enough information and making sure that we've got people reaching out to us to be proactive. So one of the things I always say to contractors that when we have a chance to be in front of them is don't just take what we're sending out for granted. Reach out, give us a call, talk to us. I mean, we have to rely on eyes and ears in the field, right? There used to be a day when we would go out after catastrophes and Mike would literally climb up on roofs and talk to roofers while they're nailing on shingles. We don't have the ability to do that anymore at scale. So we have to rely on the folks out there in the field to be our eyes and ears and provide us with information.
So let's talk about that a little bit more. There has been a big push in recent years to encourage contractors to do pricing feedback. And there are people like Ben Justison and others who are training people on how to, get their own price lists or give feedback or whatever. So what does that process look like for restorers who want to give feedback on their market and what pricing looks like in their market? How do they do that?
Well, estimate uploads, any estimate that's completed in the system and returned to our system automatically gets reviewed from a feedback perspective. But the challenge that we have, that those restorers in the field have, is that they may be incented, for lack of a better word, to just use the price that Xactware publishes. So we're getting the same thing back to us that we sent out. Okay. And if a machine is just looking at that, the machine's saying everything looks good, they're using the price that we're publishing, so it's good. So we have to rely on things outside of that cycle to help us to influence it, which is the labor rate info that comes to us from contractors, material and equipment rates that come to us from contractors. But also, frankly, it's just folks out in the field that pick up the phone and give us a call or send an email to our pricing@xactware.com email address. And we encourage people to be educated on the type of information that we need. So, it's a matter of sending us within the email, letting us know who you are, what city that you're in, what specific things you've got questions or concerns about, and even how we might be able to independently verify that. So if Mike Fulton Construction were to just call in and say, hey, I'm in Provo, Utah, and the price of drywall needs to be $2 a square foot, help me out. that's great. That gives us a start, but that means that we have to then go out and start independently verifying that with drywallers in the market. If Mike also includes in that email that here are 3 local drywall installers that you can give a call to, that helps us to get those things done much more quickly. So it's all about getting quality information in an appropriate time. And I will say there's one of the things that we're just recently started. We've had a slowdown just due to COVID, because COVID has slowed everything else down. But we're putting in place a tool that I've had a vision of for years. It's kind of like, I used to call it the golden contractor type of tool, where I wanted everybody in my team to have at least 2 or 3 contractors in every major market that they were on a first name basis with. Mm-hmm. So that if somebody called in, if Bob's Construction called in and said, hey, exactly where the price for X needs to be Y, we could call up the people that we know and say, what's going on? Can you tell me really what's going on in that particular market? And they in turn could call us. So we're putting in place that program. It's been a little bit slower to happen than what I would like, but literally going out and training a group of contractors that want to be involved in this. It's a limited thing. I mean, we can't have 20,000 people in on it, but really we don't need 20,000 people in it. I need a few hundred of key people that we can trust and be on a first name basis with in every market. They trust us, we trust them, and we can exchange information on a regular basis. They'll go through a training, not unlike what we've called our pricing specialist training, so they know how to communicate to us, know what goes into our price list, and they'll agree to feed us information on a regular basis from their market so that we can be more proactive about getting prices where they need to be for that individual market. So that's something I'm excited about. Actually started it up with some conversations with the leadership at RIA, and I'm really excited about making that happen. I'm sure those guys are listening. It's coming. It's happening very, very soon. So hang in there.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the RIA and the Advocacy and Government Affairs Committee. I know you've had a number of conversations with them and with Ed Cross, and there's definitely been some headway made there, and they've released some position statements and stuff like that to help kind of clarify Xactimate's role in the marketplace, right? So if a contractor is getting pushback on an estimate that they have, and it has, prices are maybe a little different from Xactimate, what do you recommend those contractors do at that point? I know you talked about the pricing feedback, but in that moment, they're getting pushback. What do you recommend?
First thing I always recommend is just that people understand what goes into the price that we're publishing. Much of the feedback that we get and concerns relate to people not understanding that this price that we're publishing equates to this much work. And if it's a high ceiling, or if it's a steep roof, or it's a perimeter cut on the drywall, that you really should be using this other price, or you should be using these combination of things. So making sure that people have a good understanding of that, because all of those things together are what builds up to the price. And if I'm a contractor, when I used to do finished carpentry work, it was here's a price for the door that's installed and so on. But you have to also include the cost to finish the door. And is the door stained with the jamb and trim painted? Is the jamb and trim stained with the door painted? Is it a solid core? Is it a hollow core door? All of those things. Are you replacing the lock set? So the first thing we try and get to is make sure that we're speaking the same language about that. And if they are, then we just encourage them to have that intelligent conversation with the insurer the same way that we do. And work through the issue of trying to make an adjustment to the price. We realize that's difficult, and often what we have to do, unfortunately, what has to happen is the contractor will work within that estimate and work within that price that we've published, and then reach out to us on the back end so that we can adjust that price on a going forward basis. That causes some challenges because it's a delay. I'm not getting a price that I need to get for that thing today for this particular job, but it's kind of the world that we have to live in until we can be more proactive about those things and get things moving more quickly. My personal preference would be for us to get to more of a true competitive bid type of situation. And I think you see this in other markets. In the EU, they do it quite often. It's called a tendering process. Okay. Contractors will just upload their price list for a thing to a site. And then once you have a scope from which to work, the carrier can say, I want you to price out this scope with everybody in this particular market and show me who's giving. I don't care what Bob is compared to Bill on a square foot of drywall, or Mary is compared to Jane on a linear foot of baseboard. I want to know who's going to give me the best price overall for the entire group of work. I also want to see other things such as what's their customer satisfaction survey record like? How many estimates have they done in the system? What's their propensity to upload a lowball estimate and then supplement it later with a larger estimate? All of those things get taken into effect with that type of tendering process. Would love to do it. There hasn't been a large amount of interest, frankly, on either side, on the contractor side or the carrier side, to get into that model. So we are where we are in this particular world. We're still in the world of doing these individual stick by stick, brick by brick estimates. The industry wants to move towards automation. I mean, if you talk to insurers and frankly contractors at some point, they'd like to go out and take a picture with this thing and have it create an estimate. And if you see some of the technology that's coming out, we're not that far off. You can literally, with that type of a device, do measurements. You can do an entire diagram of a home and have it be pinpoint accurate now with that technology in a fraction of the time of going out and stretching out a tape measure and drawing the thing. There's also, object recognition that you can see what the thing is. And we've got the object recognition fairly well nailed. The challenge that you have, I mean, you can tell that that's drywall. If I'm pointing it at that, I can tell it's drywall. Knowing whether it's 5/8 or whether it's 1/2 inch drywall, you're not going to tell from a picture. But if you know the type of room that it's in, or the age of the home, or the location of the home, things of that nature, then you can appropriately add that other information to it. If it's a curved wall, you can bet that it's 2 layers of quarter inch drywall, and so on. Stonework, there's things you can gauge based upon the affluency of the neighborhood and the age of the home and things of that nature. A fireplace, is it a true masonry fireplace or a prefab with just a facade on it? Those are all age and quality based factors. So we're getting there. The thing that's the more difficult is identifying the actual value. Cultured stone has many different grades that you can get into. Carpeting has many different grades that you can get into. So how do you identify from that photo what's the appropriate grade for the thing? And that happens with personal property as well. So you can tell the thing that you're looking at as a 70-inch LED TV, but is it a Vizio or is it a Sony?
Yeah.
Things you've got to get to. So hopefully we'll be able to crack that nut. I will say the other piece with regard to object recognition, pretty good at this point from the technology perspective of recognizing the thing and the measurement of the thing. The next nut that has to be cracked is recognizing the damage and the extent of the damage so that you know what portion of it needs to be replaced. But those are little links in the automation chain that I think are moving along as quickly as we're able. I mean, the auto side of the industry is moving along much more quickly than we, because there's a finite number of cars out there, and each has a finite number of parts, and they're all the same. It's either an OEM or an aftermarket part. It doesn't work that way on the property side, obviously, but it's something that we're progressing in as quickly as we're able. We're assuming that from an automation perspective, the things we'll automate first are the simple, small losses, glass breakage, theft, things of that nature. And then you start moving the needle as the faith in the technology grows, then you start moving the needle into the more complex losses. But they've got to be learning algorithms. And that's what we're trying to build at this point.
Okay. All right. So how are you accommodating for inflation that's happening right now? It's been at its high, but it's still high. So how do you accommodate for that? And how should restorers handle hey, this is still way more expensive than it used to be, or maybe more expensive than what the Xactimate line item is or whatever on a job? How do you accommodate for that?
Yeah, really, really trying to gauge the market and trying to forecast as best as possible. We've always been hesitant to forecast far out. The prime example of inflation, let's say, pre-COVID. So say 5 years ago, post catastrophe, you've got 10,000 roofs damaged in a particular location, and people are going out and estimating the cost to replace this roof based upon today's price. It's November 16th, 2021. But you know that by the time a roofer gets around to doing it, it's going to be March 16th, 2022, and prices could be drastically different. Those are the things that we can't solve for. We've got to be able to address that in some way, shape, or form. It's very tough for us to just say that, hey, we think that you're not going to actually be able to replace this roof for another 4 months, and we believe, therefore, that the price in 4 months is going to be this. But what we can do a better job of is trying to forecast for the month ahead. So assuming that when we publish a price on November 1st, we want to make sure that that price is usable throughout the month of November. And so you can look at trends on the way things have been going. Lumber is the poster child of this over the last year or so, but based upon the way things have been going, and project that it will be X by the end of the month. And so we want to build in that perishability factor to it. But the inflation is not just an issue certainly an issue on the contractor side, and don't want to diminish that. What the other thing that we're dealing with is just the availability of products. That you order steel today, you're not going to get it for 3 or 4 months, or concrete might be rationed. It's really tough to appropriately estimate based upon that length of time that it's going to take you to get that thing in. And so there's things that we're trying to solve from that perspective. But I would say with just general inflation, doing our best to just model the market. And there are certain things that we know are commodities that have an impact on that. Lumber, we know apart from COVID, that there's a seasonality to lumber, and that we just know that we expect it to increase in the spring and decrease in the fall. And it's something that we track, month to month. Drywall is another thing. Roofing shingles, that are petroleum based, are going to be highly impacted by, the cost of crude oil and so on. Copper, you can track the cost of copper from a raw materials price and have that impact all of the copper piping and so on within the application. But it's something that you've got to be on the ball with. You've got to track it on a regular basis, and again, rely on people to tell us what's going on. I'm not as worried about the material side of it, frankly, as I am about the labor side, because it's real easy to go out and get material pricing from literally anybody in the market. The labor price is the biggest variable. And what I've been telling carriers based on this year, I mean, the demand surge of labor post-catastrophe is always directly proportional to what the construction industry is like in that location pre-disaster. So if there's a lot of people out of work, you have a cat come in, you're going to put those people to work. You're not going to see a lot of demand surge on the labor. But if everybody that wants to work is already working, then you got to bring people in from the outside, from other states. You got to house them, you got to feed them, and so on. And that's when you're going to see some massive increases in demand surge. And the way the construction market has just been booming nationwide. If we had a major cat, we were tracking this pretty closely with Ida, but luckily it wasn't a tremendous storm year like we've seen in other years, because it would have just been some unprecedented inflation on labor is what we would have seen. And it's tough, but those are the things that when I reach out to this particular community, really need your help on the labor side of it, folks. So because that is the thing that is probably the biggest variable. Apart from productivity, labor productivity is something that we've got to address, and you're trying to target that middle of the road for a job, but labor rates are tough. We've got some good information that comes in, but I mean, you look at what they're paying for minimum wage, even in the food service industry, and you've got to be able to adjust that. Union scales are often factored off of minimum wages. We want to make sure that we're capturing that information in an appropriate way, and not just the wage that's paid, but the wage that's billed.
Okay. So is contractors giving feedback on wages and labor rates? Is that the same process as for materials and stuff like that? Just reaching out?
Yeah, and expanding it with that certified contractor specialist program that we're putting in place. I think that will be a big help.
Okay. All right. Well, that was my next question. So you beat me to it. I love it. Okay. So I'm curious so obviously the next year being bought by CoreLogic has been a big topic of conversation right now. So I was curious, I was hoping that you could tell us or explain Xactwares' place in the ecosystem within Verisk.
So we're a subsidiary of the Verisk organization. We're still solidly in the camp of providing estimating tools. There are other business units within Verisk that utilize the pricing data that we publish. So the underwriting side, 360 value that's priced out or that's leveraged on that particular side. But we remain a separate business entity that's an affiliate or a subsidiary within Verisk. Is that?
Yes.
Sorry if that's not what you're asking.
No, that is what I was asking. So you have data that's going to Verisk, and Verisk is a huge data company, correct? So is some of the data that they're collecting also helping you as you establish pricing and all of that?
So the things that we do leverage for that, I mean, we are solely the ones within the organization that are researching building costs, labor and material rates. But what we can leverage from some of those other data entities within Verisk are things such as the types of homes in a particular market. What's the general construction type? What's the general finish type in Seattle versus Phoenix, Arizona? What's the general type of quality or of homes in this particular neighborhood versus another? What are the ages of those homes? And all of those things help us to determine, the average slope of a roof. It helps us to determine whether we should automatically be applying drip edge to a roof or ice and water shield in the valleys and around the perimeter, et cetera, things of that nature. So it's probably more coming from the other direction about the typical types of construction in different markets than it is going the other direction from us to them.
Okay. All right. So sorry, I just totally blanked on what my next question was and had to, okay, data. That's where I was going to go. Okay. So with the next year CoreLogic deal, a lot of the conversation among contractors has been being concerned about how much data CoreLogic is now going to have on contractors. Verisk has the same thing. Xactware has the same thing. NextGear has a ton of data on contractors and their scopes and their profit margins and all of that. So what do you tell contractors that are like, how much data do you have? And is it like, what are you going to do with all of my information?
Well, your information is yours. The things that we're interested in, and we've got some pretty strict data security measures with regard to, personal private information. So we can't share names, addresses, phone numbers, claim numbers, things of that nature. We don't store, nor do we want to store social security numbers or anything like that. But when it comes to data related to an estimate, so the things that you have put into an estimate that I've estimated, 30 squares of a 30-year architectural comp on this particular roof at this particular time, and the price that I put in there is X. That's the information that we want to capture and use it as a part of our market research. And I can't answer with regard to what Dash and CoreLogic is doing with it, but that's really what our interest is in for that, is so that we can take and aggregate that and turn around and publish out to the rest of the industry that we believe, based upon the pricing information that we've seen, that the going market rate for 30-year architectural comps in this particular zip code is this.
Okay. All right. You kind of talked about integrations kind of at the beginning of our conversation, but you and I, when we spoke offline, you described Xactware as having an open market kind of feel, right? So a few years ago, Dash wasn't integrating with Xactimate, that, the integration was cut off. Is there any worry that that's going to happen in the future? And how do you view integrations with Xactimate and making sure that different software platforms are playing nice, I suppose, together?
It's an interesting world. We do want to maintain an open architecture and an open ecosystem, and people want that more and more. If you look at everything, I mean, if we get, as we try and get further down the automation path, there's a number of things that have to happen in order to automate the claim. And some of the things are not everything that a contractor would use. I mean, on the carrier side, you've got first notice of loss, then you've got valuation, you've got detection of fraud, and then, ultimately you've got payment at the back end. So you've got these individual links in this automation chain, and customers want to have the opportunity to either use the links that Verisk provides or plug in their own links. Sometimes that's a homegrown thing that they've created that's proprietary to them, or they've got another third party that they want to use and to be able to plug into that. And we want to allow that. We also want to be able to provide the best solutions possible to the market. I think that naturally, as when it comes to integrating with a third party versus creating the solution ourselves, we can always provide something that's probably a little bit tighter. If we're doing the work, then we can in integrating with a third party, because the whole point of integrating with a third party like a Dash or something like that is to prevent or minimize duplicate entry. I don't want to enter Michelle Blevins into this particular piece of software that I have to go enter it in over here. I want those two things to communicate, and not just that, but addresses and dates and phone numbers and all of those other things. And that's really the intent of it. And we can take that a little bit further when the integration is between two Xactware products naturally than we can between an Xactware product and a third party. But nonetheless, we want to fully support in any way we can, having customer choice in that market.
So there are a lot of tools out there now, like Amy and some other platforms that help, review estimates and catch missed line items or whatever. Do you have any tips that you give contractors for making sure that they're creating an accurate estimate and then, getting paid in full for the work that they're doing?
Yeah. So Amy is a decent tool from what I know of it. We're actually creating and expanding on our own. We've got a tool that we've just launched in midsummer that's continuing to grow. It's called Xactscope. It's an audit-based tool that it has a water mitigation solution and an exterior solution. Currently, it will be growing into interior solutions, but the entire goal of it is to apply some industry-level audits to your estimate so that a contractor can literally see whether he or she has missed some things in that particular estimate based upon the way Xactwares price list is structured. If there are things that they need to add, if there's things that they potentially overscoped and might need to remove. And we've got some great industry partners that are working with us on building out those rules. So I think our goal is initially at launch is somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,500 different rules that will apply to that. And then further, customers will be able to apply their own rules on top of the industry standard rules that we would create. So an insurer, and this is the tough part, is that, we might have a rule that says, hey, if you're in South Florida, you've got to be using 30-pound felt underneath your shingles, and you've got to be using, 6 nails per shingle rather than just 4. The carrier might have a rule that says, well, we don't replace felt when we're doing a re-roof. And so those are the things that we've got to live with, but we're going to create the industry standard rules and allow other rules that might be applicable from a contractor side as well to be administered and put on top of that. And I think that will help. Yeah. And if you think about it, there's not a great leap between auditing an estimate post-estimate and determining whether it's correct and creating that estimate for you up front based upon the conditions of the job and the location and the type and so on. And that's the goal. That's the holy grail that we want to get to.
Okay. All right. So earlier in the conversation, when you were talking about expanding into other markets and other countries, you talked about preferring flexibility over rigidity in the marketplace. Can you explain a little bit about what you meant by that?
Yeah, and it's really a level of acceptance. And, from a contractor's perspective, those that are in I hate to say it this way, but we've evolved to a certain state in the US and Canadian markets about being accepting of this is just the way that we produce a claim. But there are a lot of markets where they're still doing estimates with this, or with Excel. And the carrier for whom a contractor might be working for may have a price guide of 50 items. 100 items that they want the contractor to live by, the most commonly used. And then beyond that, the contractor has flexibility to add his or her own pricing beyond that. And frankly, even when you look at Xactwares price list of 17,000 items, and we've done this analysis, once you get beyond the top 100 most used items, the chance of any one of them beyond the remaining 17,000 or 16,900 of them being used drops like below 1%. So the majority of the items really fall into that top 100. So those are the ones that we really want to be good at. But, the rigidity, the more items that we have in that price list, the more we are obligated to research, and that takes manpower, and you worry about accuracy and the ability to do that. So I would much rather, going into a market, be able to say, here's 500 items that we can have a very high degree of confidence in, rather than saying, here's 10,000 items that we can have a lesser degree of confidence in. So that's really what I think the rigidity from our perspective. I'm a firm believer in having an open system and a highly competitive environment where people can compete, not just on the level of service. Are you coming out there on time versus the other guy and fulfilling your word and cleaning up after yourself, but competing on a price perspective. And I really want to see us, I think we've lost something in the rigidity that we have in the US market with regard to price, and would love to see us be able to, in some way, shape, or form, allow and be able to infuse some of that competitive nature back into the market.
Okay, perfect. All right, anything else that you want to add before we wrap it up? Thank you for all of your insights so far.
No, it's been a great conversation. Hope we can do it again.
Yes.
And I just encourage people, they're welcome to reach out to me, welcome to reach out to our team. We're here for you. It is a strange world that we're living in. But we're doing our best, as I know you are. Really appreciate everything that this industry does for us, and for a meeting for the community and every one of your communities. So just thanks, and appreciate the opportunity, Michelle.
Well, thank you, Mike. And for those who are watching, Mike and I will hopefully have more conversations in the future, and stay updated. So if you have questions for Mike, you can also send them to me. And Mike, I appreciate your time. Have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thanks, Michelle.
For more Restoration Today, visit our website, cnrmagazine.com, or find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts.